Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Mental Fitness Podcast. I'm your host, Mona, your mental gym buddy, and today I'm talking to Maggie Holland. She's a therapist in Washington State, and we talk all things how you can find the therapist that is right for you. Enjoy.
You are now entering your mental gym. Take one deep breath, stretch your body, and let's get going.
Joined by our lovely guest, Maggie Holland. And just to start things off, I would love to ask you, who are you, Maggie?
Sure. So my name is Maggie Holland. I am a licensed mental health counselor in the state of Washington. Within my work, I'm really passionate about mental health, particularly with women's issues, anxiety, OCD. I write and work with a lot of people that are recovering from narcissistic abuse and recovering from emotionally immature parents. And outside of work, I love to read and I love to hang out with my two really big dogs. So that's who I am.
Beautiful. How big are those dogs? If you're saying really big.
Yeah, my biggest dog Doodle, he's about 100 pounds. And then my other dog Dipstick, yes, those are their real names. He's about 75 pounds.
Love it. Great names.
Yes,
for sure.
And they came to us named that, and we could not agree on anything else, so it had to stay.
It works out
Yes.
for everybody. Thanks so
Yes.
much for that introduction to yourself. And I think this podcast is really all about finding tools to help you think and feel better.
Yes.
And I think therapy is definitely a major key tool for that. And I think just to start things off, why would somebody need therapy?
Yeah, I think for me, what I usually tell people, the biggest reason why someone might need therapy is if they are noticing that their mental health symptoms or things that are coming up for them are getting in the way of their day-to-day functioning. So what I mean by that is if your mental health symptoms are getting in the way of you being able to communicate efficiently with your partner, or you being able to make it through your workday, or sometimes even getting yourself out of bed and being able to take care of yourself and do basic hygiene functions. Those are usually the things that I say first, foremost, if your mental health is getting in the way of you functioning day to day, the things you need to do. Therapy is probably going to be really helpful for you. That's a big thing that we focus on in therapy. But I always like to mention as well that therapy can be beneficial for anybody. It's a safe, private, confidential space where you can say anything. And unless there's a mandated reporting aspect, it's going to stay there with your therapist. So you can talk through really weird dreams that you're having. You can talk through, being really mad at your parents, and it's okay, and you're going to get a non-judgmental space where you can say whatever it is you need to say that is bothering you or on your mind. So I think it can be beneficial for anybody, but particularly I think people need therapy when it's getting in the way of their functioning.
Right. I think that's a very good distinction of that's the point where you really need somebody to pick you up almost. But it can also be a good preventative tool almost if you're like, okay, need a safe space, like you said, to just talk with somebody.
Yeah, absolutely.
I guess it's also very helpful. In that vein, how different is, because I know you also do coaching. How would you differentiate them between therapy and coaching if it's is there a big distinction, or is it kind of similar for you, or how do you feel about that?
Yeah. So for the most part, I do coaching, but I don't do one-to-one coaching, primarily just because I have a license and that is my primary source of income and my primary work. It's really hard to get a license to be a licensed mental health therapist or counselor in different states. So just to really protect my license, I don't do one-to-one coaching, but I know there's a lot of therapists that will do one-to-one coaching in addition to one-to-one therapy. For the most part, the difference is that therapy, you can do a lot more depth work. We can get into why do you have these beliefs? Where is this anxiety stemming from in your childhood? Whereas coaching, for the most part, tends to focus a lot more on the current moment and how do we get you back on your way and on your feet a little bit. Most of the time as a therapist, sometimes I will have people come in and we do more of that that work to get that functioning back up. But most of the time it does turn to depth work over time, just so that those symptoms don't start coming back later.
Right.
So most of the time, good therapy turns into depth work with time, or it starts there. And coaches just don't usually have the practice and skills and education to be able to do that depth work. And that depth work is where we actually see like long-term change, so that people don't relapse into symptoms as readily. So yeah, that would be the main thing that I would say is the difference between coaching and therapy. And if you're working with a coach that is doing depth work, I would be hesitant, just because they haven't been required to have the same amount of training that a mental health therapist has had.
Right. And with that, you mean like they're not able to kind of guide you in the right way or understand kind of the deep nature of it as I guess you have your tools from your certifications and schooling and everything that just gives you an additional perspective, I guess, to guide the person.
Yeah. And, I think to suffer is the human condition. So it's not that coaches can't understand it by any means, but I don't think people realize usually that the mental health therapist world is highly regulated, and that's done to protect clients and to kind of be a safeguard against therapists that would do harm. Not saying that there are not still therapists out
Mm-hmm.
there that do harm. There's bad apples in every bunch. But the coaching field is highly unregulated. So to me, the risk is just so much higher. So to be a mental health therapist, you have to have an undergraduate degree. For the most part, you have to have a graduate degree. You have to do a internship that is supervised by multiple people when you're in grad school. And then when you come out of grad school, most states have a requirement on having supervised hours. So, for example, in Washington State, I had to have 3,000 associate hours before I could apply for full independent licensure. And I had to be getting supervision that entire time that's watching my work, making sure I'm not causing any harm, helping me to grow as a therapist. And so all of those things are done to make sure that I can sit with a client's experience and not do any harm, to minimize the risk of that. Coaching has no requirements, whether it's education, licensure, supervision. There's just no requirements, which means that people can skip it. Not saying
Yeah.
that everybody does, but I think the risk for harm is just higher because there are less eyes on coaches making sure that they're doing a good job.
Thank you so much for that explanation.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's so important to realize because, there's so many even like certified coaches out there. And then you look at what that certification is, and it's like an online course they did in 5 hours or something like that. So I definitely want to emphasize being careful in that way. Not that coaches can have their benefits too, but just if you're doing the deep work, you're definitely in a more vulnerable position. So I think that's where then like the distinction to actually maybe go to like a more rigorous therapist in that way can be super important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yep.
If somebody's like, okay, I want to kind of go to a therapist, is it sometimes that you're like, hey, like maybe you don't even need to do the internal work? Are there cases like that where you just say, oh, just find a coach? Or is it really more that everybody could use a little bit of therapy sometimes?
I'm totally biased, but I think everybody could benefit from a little bit of therapy. If there is something really specific that somebody is needing, something I see a lot of times, if somebody needs a mindset coach for something specific, like I want to level up in my career and ask for a raise. That's probably something, if you go to a specific coach, sure, that's going to be great. They specialize in that. If there's anything underneath that of, do you believe that you're not worthy of this raise? Probably therapy is going to be a better bet then. I think it's just so specific to each situation, but if there's any depth to the thing that you are bringing to coaching or therapy, I would definitely suggest to go with a therapist instead of a coach.
Yeah. Okay, very good. Thank you.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
then, so once somebody's like, okay, I think therapy, either they're in a position where they actually need it, or they're more like, okay, I want to have some of those deeper, want to do some deeper work. What are some of the steps that somebody can take to find the coach that is right for them?
The coach or the therapist?
Oh, sorry, the therapist. Yes, of course.
Totally okay.
Too many.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. I was about to be like, oh, I don't know if I can help you find a coach. I don't know
Mm,
how to go about it. It's kind of the Wild West out here. But
right.
finding a therapist, I could definitely help with that. So,
Perfect.
especially in the US, I would say that the number one thing to consider as you start your journey to find a therapist is considering how are you wanting to pay. So if
Mm.
you are wanting to use your insurance, then you're going to take a very different route than if you are willing to pay out of pocket or pay out of pocket and have your insurance reimbursed it, which depends on your plan. It's really a mess, which
Mm.
depends on your insurance plan and what they cover. So if you are wanting to use your insurance, then that is the first thing that I would use to weed out people and get you a list of people that could work. So most of the time you can do this by calling your insurance or going online to a portal and finding therapists that are in network. There's also several really great directories such as Psychology Today. Therapy Den is another one where in the search function you can include your insurance and it will filter in the people that take your insurance and filter out the people that don't take your insurance. If you're wanting to use insurance, start there because there is a real shortage of therapists that take insurance. For example, I don't take any insurance at all. There's a lot of societal and systemic reasons why therapists don't take insurance. The biggest ones being insurance takes a really long time to reimburse the therapist. So they've done the work and they sit there for months waiting to be paid. And then
Oh.
they tend to not pay the rate that a therapist has determined this is my living wage or this is what I need to make in order to pay my bills. Most of the time, insurance is not going to reimburse at those rates. So for most therapists, it's a pay cut and it's also a very long period to wait to be paid. So
Wow.
if you're wanting to use your insurance, that is just a heads up that you might end up on a wait list for a couple months. You might struggle to find somebody, and that does not mean that you're necessarily doing it wrong. That means you are feeling the repercussions of our health system not valuing mental health. So, first thing, how are you wanting
Okay.
to pay was probably the first thing I would say to tell people to look for.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think it's similar in Switzerland too. So I think
Mhm.
just because I have a lot of listeners there, definitely
Yeah.
reach out to your insurance and see what is covered, what isn't covered. Do you have
Mhm.
basic insurance, extra insurance? Yeah, and that can be, I think you said it very nicely, like a first filtering mechanism.
Yes.
Beyond that, once you have like a first list of, okay, these are the ones I can pay out of pocket, or these are the ones that are covered by insurance,
Mhm.
what's next?
Yes. Yes. And oftentimes, as you heard me say, talk about that reimbursement piece, most therapists that have you pay out of pocket for their services will provide you, it's called a super bill, but they'll provide you with basically a receipt of all the sessions that you have had and paid for so that you can give it to your insurance and they will reimburse you. So if that is something that you're open to, it's a little bit extra work, but I think really worth it. What you're looking for in your insurance plan or when you call your insurance, you're wanting to ask, do I have out of network mental health benefits? And what are those? What's covered? What's not? Sometimes they'll give you specific codes that are and are not covered. Just let your therapist know and they can use that. They'll tell you what percentage you're covered. They can talk to you about your deductible, but that is kind of a workaround that a lot of private pay therapists, including myself, tend to do. Because we've already had the sessions, it's no problem for me to give you a receipt. And if you can get some money back, you might as well.
Okay, that's a very good tip. Thank
Mhm.
you. Another workaround. Very
Yeah.
nice. Yeah,
Yeah.
need
All the
those.
tips in the system that is not wanting to be very cooperative with mental health.
Then,
Yes.
yeah. Oh
Yep.
man. Oh
Yeah.
man. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So I would say insurance is probably the first thing to look for. There are definitely other things if you want me to hop into that, but that would be the very first one because, Therapy's not cheap. It can be
Mhm.
essential, it can be helpful, it can be life-saving, but it does not tend to be cheap. So that would
Right.
be the first thing. The last thing that any of us want is insurance to be causing more stress, and or therapy to cause more stress,
Mm.
and then your therapy becomes a stressor on your mental health. We're here to fix and help, not fix. We're here to help your mental health. We don't want to be making it worse. So that's usually the first place I say to start, because that can be a stressor too.
Yeah, it seems quite daunting, to be honest. But
Yeah.
for sure, yeah, get
Yeah.
informed. And once you do the work, I think then once you're set up, it's gonna hopefully be easier
Yeah.
and worth it for
Absolutely.
sure. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
So, what are some things to look out then? Different coaches, different God, different therapists have different focus areas, or
Yes.
is it something just like, oh, I like this coach, or what are
Mm-hmm.
some factors to consider
Mm-hmm.
once you've done your filtering?
Yes. So once you've done the logistical filtering, which is important, but once you have done that, I would say the next two most important pieces to consider as you're picking out a therapist is whether they treat and specialize in the thing that you're struggling with. Seems obvious, but we got to say it, and we can talk more about that in a second. And last but definitely not least is that, yeah, whether you like them or not, I call it whether you click with somebody or not, that is so important in order for the therapy to be successful.
Mm.
Having a really good connection with your therapist is actually the number one indicator of whether therapy is going to end up feeling helpful or not. So I would argue it's actually the most important thing, but you can't necessarily filter that out on search engines. So
Hmm.
we leave it here for the end. But yeah, so on these two pieces of making sure that your therapist treats whatever you're working in, there's therapy is the therapeutic world is so much alphabet soup, as in there's so many acronyms of what people do and don't do for modalities. So there's CBT, there's EMDR, there's ACE. ACT, it's spelled ACT. And so there's so many acronyms, but basically any good therapist is going to speak in their profiles on their website specifically to what they treat, and you should leave their profile or website saying, yep, I feel confident that that therapist treats what I'm talking about. So if you feel like you have anxiety coming up, this goes without saying, but don't go to a depression specialist. They're probably going to be able to help you, but it's not something they look at and think about every single day. So, for example, I work with anxiety and OCD. I treat depression as well. I treat a lot of trauma because that is the depth work that we were talking about. But OCD, for example, is a really specific one. So, if you think you might have OCD coming up, it probably isn't helpful to go to somebody who specializes in depression work or psychosis. They're just not seeing it every single day. They're not, it's not fresh in their brain of, okay, we do this and then we do this and I'm going to lead you through this, right?
Hmm.
So any profile or directory, regardless of the acronyms, should be speaking to your experience. And if you read it and go, yep, that therapist knows what I'm talking about, that's they probably treat what you're struggling with.
Hmm.
So reading that and being like, okay, they understand what I'm coming to the table with, which helps with the next one of whether you feel like you click with your therapist, whether they get it, whether you can trust this person on some level to say your deepest, darkest fears and trust that they are going to protect them and not judge you with them. If you're judged by a therapist, run, get out of there. If you're judged by
Yeah.
a coach, run, get out of there. But whether you can click with somebody is the basis for, can I develop trust with this person? And trust is so necessary in order to get into that depth work, in order to take the risks that it is required for you to begin feeling better. So, for example, I like to say, with OCD and anxiety, a lot of times our symptoms that come up are from us avoiding things we're scared of. And so, working with a therapist, they're going to try to empower you to take the risk of trying that scary thing so that we can get new information that doesn't have to be a danger. That takes a ton of trust. So if
Wow.
you walk away from a website or a profile not having that gut sense feeling of, yeah, I could probably talk to this person, or yeah, I think they understand what I'm going through, that's probably your next place to weed out whether that therapist is a good fit for you or not.
Amazing. Thank you. Just to kind of follow on that first aspect, I think just even knowing kind of what, like whether it be OCD, anxiety, depression, are there tests that people can take to be like, okay, if they just feel like, oh, I might need I feel like I need a therapist, but I don't even know which of the topics I need. Is there something that can help them figure that out?
So when you start with a therapist, the like tests and quizzes we're talking about is going to be usually an assessment tool you're going to go through. So, for example, when I start working with clients, everybody gets a screener for depression, everybody gets a screener for anxiety, they get a screener for trauma. So, some of those quizzes are going to be more diagnostic assessment tools. And as therapists, I take all of those and I look at those and be like, wow, you're the screener for anxiety is really high. Okay, we're probably looking at anxiety.
Right.
Um, or the depression screener was really high. So I'm sure you can find those on the internet, and I'm sure
Yeah.
somebody has converted those into a quiz. But for the most part, if there's something that is coming up for you, and even if it's something along the lines of, I'm just feeling lost and I don't know how to get myself unstuck and I
Hmm.
can't put more words to that experience. A therapist who specializes that is probably going to use those words in their profiles on their website. And it's probably going to say something along the lines of, I love helping people get unstuck when they feel lost. So,
Okay.
yeah. So even if you can't really articulate what the issue is very well, a good therapist website or directory is going to make you say, ha, that's exactly it. There it is. Um,
Good.
so in an ideal world, that's what we're looking for.
Okay. Very helpful.
Mhm.
So yeah, just look at those websites and trust your gut too.
Yeah.
What if you now start seeing a therapist and you're just like, oh, it's not clicking, or yeah, it's just not working out the way you wanted it to?
Mhm.
What do you do then for you?
Yeah. Yeah. Breakups with therapists happen
Yeah.
all the time. And I just like to remind people that this is a really important aspect of our training as therapists that we go through, if you're trained well, that we go through of, we are taught to be rejected by people over and over and over again and to not take it personally. There are still times where
Mm,
people take it personally. There are times where people make it personal. But for the most part, therapists are there to help you feel better. If we are not being able to help you feel better, we want you to go to somebody who can help. And so at that point, I usually suggest having a really direct, upfront conversation. I know that that is so uncomfortable. Come to your next therapy session and say, I want to talk about the fact that this isn't feeling really helpful. It's not feeling like a good fit. And a good therapist or a good coach, but a good therapist especially, I would hope would respond and say, gee, I'm really sorry. That really does not feel great. Can you talk to me about the things that aren't clicking so that I can see, is there something I need to change in how I'm presenting? So an example I like
hmm
to use with this is, I'm not doing it today, but I curse in sessions a lot. That is who I genuinely am. But for some people, they don't like that. That is not how they present. It makes them uncomfortable. So if it's something like that, I can absolutely not curse in sessions.
Yeah.
So is there a different way that I can show up that would be more supportive of you? Or is there something deeper that you're not getting from our work together? The modalities that I use aren't working. You don't feel like you're clicking with me. It's just a personality thing. Great. Can you tell me what you are looking for? What would be more helpful so that I can get you referrals for somebody that is going to be a better fit? Because as therapists, we never and should never be just leaving people hanging. The only reason that people get left hanging is if they end up ghosting their therapist and never come back and communicate what they need. We still
Mm.
provide referrals, but we're kind of guessing what is the best fit. So if you go to your therapist and it's not working and you have this really uncomfortable direct conversation, this is not working. This is what needs are not getting met and what I'm hoping for from therapy. I definitely suggest this, one, so the therapist can get you better fit referrals. Two, so a therapist has a chance to maybe explain, because a lot of therapy is really uncomfortable. They can explain, this is what it looks like to work with anxiety or OCD. Just want to not sugarcoat that. I want to manage any expectations. And so
Mm.
really managing those expectations is the second piece, because, therapists, we're not magicians. It's going to be really uncomfortable. There are going to be aspects of working in therapy that really suck, honestly, to be very
Mm.
eloquent about that. There are aspects of therapy that really suck. And so
Yeah.
managing those expectations up front and addressing any of those, but also so that we can get you connected with somebody who might be a better fit. Because sometimes you come into therapy thinking, I want to work on this one thing. And it's okay if it changes. It's okay if you're like, okay, now I want to work on this thing, have training in it. It's fine. We'd love to connect you with
Mhm.
somebody that we trust, that we vetted, that works in that and is going to do a good job and ultimately help you. So
Mm.
therapist breakouts happen all the time. It's ideal. And we have training and not taking it personally. Sometimes it still feels personal, but we really
Yeah.
do our best to not take it personal. And ultimately, our goal is to help you feel better. And so if it's not with us, we're going to help you find the person that it is with. So please don't ghost your therapist. Have a conversation. They're going to help you. Like, they're going to take a lot of the work out of it, because we're very empathetic feeling people. We're probably going to feel so bad that we are not the good fit. We're going to find you a good fit. Like, I will get that answer
Mm.
for you. So don't ghost your
Very good.
therapist. Talk to them.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. For people to stand up to themselves and also say like, "Hey, it's not working for me," is like, as a people pleaser, I feel like that can be hard. But
So hard.
you say
Yeah.
like a good therapist should also, yeah, recognize that and help you figure it out.
Yeah.
Does the ghosting happen a lot? Ghosting your therapist, or
Yeah, it happens more often than you would think. And I think this comes up to when you are ready to be done with therapy, have a conversation there too. Hey, I'm feeling a lot better. I'm thinking that we can start winding down, we can start closing up. Because relationships ending are a normal part of life. It sucks for both people, but that's a really good time to practice a healthy ending to a relationship of, hey, I think I've got what I needed here. I'm going to go. This is not personal on you. I'm just going to communicate it. But yeah, ghosting, I tend to see happens more often when people are done with therapy and they don't want to say
okay,
that. And the people pleasing, nervous to make me upset, nervous to make, somebody angry or retaliation or anything like that. Good therapists should not be retaliatory. Is that a word? Retaliatory? They're not going to
I
retaliate.
know what you mean. So I think
Yes.
it's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're
Okay.
not going to retaliate. They're going to say, they're probably going to praise you and be like, wow, thank you for telling me. I
Mm.
do actually agree that you were doing much better. Like, let's review all the progress you've made. Like, pump you up even more to be like, yeah, you're done. Let's get you out of here.
Amazing.
Yeah.
That's good. Are you ever at the point where you also see like, okay, this person has been here long enough and he or she or they are actually fine now? Do you ease them out too? Or is it really that the person, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So,
So what I tend to do is I very gently bring up, hey, things seem like they're a lot better. And it seems like maybe you don't need to come see me every single week. What are your thoughts on that? And some people have a pretty big reaction and say, no, I do not want to stop seeing you. Sometimes that indicates
okay.
we have more depth work to do, right? Like we have
Mm.
you are attached to me and you're scared to lose that attachment, right? And so sometimes that indicates we have some more depth work to do of like, okay, attachments come and go sometimes. Let's talk about that. But
Mm.
oftentimes when people are feeling better, they'll bring it up or I'll bring it up, and then we'll go down to
Okay.
less frequent sessions. So when I first start working with people, and a lot of therapists will start on a weekly basis if they possibly can, build the relationship,
Hmm.
get the work going, help you feel motivated. And then over time, then I will decrease to every other week. Usually once we start doing the every other week, people kind of start seeing, okay, I'm doing better. I don't need to maybe stay. But then sometimes people really want to stay and they need more time to taper down. And so then sometimes people will go to once every 3 weeks, once a month. I'll have people
Okay.
that will do a check-in every other month. And I'm like, okay, you're doing better. You went 2 months without seeing me. You're probably ready. Um,
Hmm.
but, some people also just really like being in therapy and like having that confidential space to just, I'm going to come and I'm going to vent to you about things I can't vent anywhere else. And if that's how you want to use therapy, it's still a productive use of your time because that's protecting your relationships. It's getting that emotional energy out. So that can still be a useful way to spend therapy. I think it's just helpful to give your therapist a heads up of, yeah, I'm probably done with my depth work. I'm probably done with the functioning stuff, but I just like having this space to come talk to
Mm.
you. Most therapists are going to say, great, just stay. We just adjusted expectations of what our work looks like, and now we're on the same page. Wonderful. So direct communication is really the key with your therapist.
Oh, yeah. Communication on all sides. I feel like
Yes. Yeah.
verbalizing the how are you doing, and also, yeah, just
Yeah.
where you're at is so
Yeah.
important.
Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
we're almost out of time, but I think I do
Mm-hmm.
want to, as a last topic, I guess, bring up like the virtual versus in-person therapy.
Mm-hmm.
I think you
Yeah.
do virtual. How should somebody
Yes.
feel that one out?
Yeah. This is really heavily personal preference. So a lot of people feel very strongly that they want in person. Many people, because of their schedules, because of maybe where they live and how many therapist options they have, feel that online would be better. I do all virtual work. I work with a lot of very busy women. So I work with moms, I work with high functioning perfectionists, I work with, OCD that can make it really hard to leave the house. So
Mm.
I think so much of it's personal preference. If you prefer to talk to somebody in person, there's lots of therapists out there now that COVID times are done. There's lots of therapists that are returning to in person work, and you can absolutely have that most likely. A lot of that depends on availability. I'm in a very saturated market, so I say that, but if you're in a rural community, you might not have that option. But I do
Mm.
think that virtual therapy offers a lot of flexibility. It offers you a lot more choice in who your therapist can be. So if you're in a rural part of the state, you could see a therapist that is in a very metropolitan part of the state where the market's much more saturated, but you get your pick. And so you can get somebody hopefully that's a better fit than if you just have one therapist in your community. They're probably great. They're probably fine. But if you want something different, virtual is usually how you're going to get it. So for me, the biggest things with working virtually is it's really flexible with
Hmm.
your time, where you are. You have to be in the state where your therapist is licensed, but I see people in the car, they'll park the car in a parking lot and come see me. Sometimes people go on a walk and they'll put their
Mm.
headphones in. Sometimes I see people as they're walking on a treadmill pretty often.
Okay.
And so it gives you a little bit more flexibility of structuring your sessions how you want them to be.
Mm.
But in person can be really lovely to connect with another human being face to face too. So this is a really personal preference, but what I usually say is the biggest advantage to virtual therapy is the flexibility with time. So you don't have to commute, but also
Yeah.
you can see any time of the day, and you can structure your session on your end how you want it to be. So the flexibility, I would say, is the biggest thing with virtual versus in person.
I love the therapy on the treadmill part. It's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
it's pretty good.
Yeah. Especially
Yeah. However,
therapists who are
people.
coming in and, yeah, if they're like, I am mad about something today, I'm like, Walk it
Mm.
out, girl. Let's go. Like, turn that speed
Put that
up and let's
incline. Yeah.
let's get that out of there. Vent to me while you walk it out. Like, stomp. Like, let's go.
Yeah. Oh, such a good one. Oh,
Yeah.
thank you so much. That was
Yes.
such a insightful conversation and super practical tips. And I think we learned a lot about how you can use therapy really to help you think and feel better. So thank you so much for this. Where
Absolutely.
can people find you if they want to learn more about you?
Yeah, so if you're in Washington State, you can find me on my website for my practice. That is Maggie Holland Counseling, PLLC. It is such a long website, y'all. I know. I'm so sorry. So that is my practice website. I also write quite a bit on mental health topics, and you can find that. That's on my coaching website. Again, I don't do one-to-one if you're outside of Washington State, but you can find a lot of my writings on my coaching website, which is mentalhealthwithmaggie.com. You can also find me on my Instagram. That is mental health with Maggie with underscores in between all of it. Annoying, but there it is. You can find me there, and I post a lot of tips with mental health. Again, you can't do one-on-one coaching with me if you're not in Washington State. I only do one-to-one therapy in Washington State, but there's lots of other ways to access information that I'm sharing. I do a lot of writing on topics, so lots of good helpful tips there.
Amazing. I'll link those all below so they don't even have to spell it all out. So
Perfect.
Make it easy for people. But
Perfect.
thanks so much again, and yeah, thanks again.
Thank
for
you
a
so much
beautiful
for having
conversation.
me.
That's it for today. Thanks so much for listening. And if you enjoyed that and want to share the advice with a friend, please go ahead and share the episode. Also, please rate the show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube. It will really help with kind of the search algorithm for this show. Thank you so much. Have a good one. Bye.